Hi, I'm Ryan from Eliminator RC. Today, we've gone in the back and dusted off some golden oldies. We're going to go ahead and take an inside look of where the RC hobby started and how it got to where it is today. First, we're going to go ahead and take a look at these three Kyoto Datsuns we have here. Two of these are the same model from the same era, about 1986. One's an electric and one's a nitro. As you can see, chassis design's pretty basic, but still keeping to its scale style. And you can tell the suspension's a bit outdated. But that just goes to show you where the technology and design has come from the geometry and suspension for how well it works, to how durable it is, to how good it looks. As you can see here, you can tell this one's fairly old on the Nitro model because it doesn't even have a pressure line feeding into the tank and it's still got a screw-on cap. That's pretty old. Nowadays with the technology, they usually have a flip lid. You go ahead and put your gas in and the exhaust is pressurized into the fuel tank, so you always get a constant fuel flow. Even if you flip upside down for a couple of seconds, it usually holds it in the line. You can look at the transmissions on these trucks and they're pretty cool. Chain drive, because they didn't have the gear technology that they did with the gearing as well as the chronic bevel gears, so they mesh together. It's all pretty basic and simple, but back then it did the job, it worked quite well, and people were very happy with it. This one's the Datsun two-wheel drive Stepside. This one's from about 1983, and you can tell once you pop the lid. As you can see, up front's pretty basic. Got a plastic chassis with a little bit of a metal shock tower with little tiny metal shocks in the front, and as it goes back, that's where all the magic happens. As you can tell, these trucks weren't pull starts. This one was a new revolutionary design back then. It was a zip cord start. Just like some of the toy spinning tops you have, you'd put a zip cord in and you'd pull it out to start it. This motor's pretty small. It's a .061. Nowadays, a small motor in the RC car world is a .15 or a .12. Now, when we take a look underneath, you can see the transmission. It's all cast white metal. Wasn't very tough, but it did the job back then. And they didn't have the fancy CNC machines that they do nowadays. Or if they did, they weren't very affordable. As it is, these cars are a lot more expensive than they are nowadays. You get into a kit like this back then, you're looking at least $1,000 by the time you're outfitted for something this fancy. Nowadays, to get you into something that is really nice, ready to go, and will rip up the terrain, you're gonna look around $500 to $600 as a baseline. And you can go up from there, of course, if you wanted to. Let's go ahead and take a look at these next two Associateds I have sitting here on the counter. For many people that are watching that were around back then when these cars were hot in their days, about late 80s, early 90s, these are the two cars that revolutionized the racing world in RCs and made it what it is today. The RC10 Gold Cub here is one of the two-wheel drive cars that were the fastest in this day. It had a stealth transmission and it had a Gold Cub chassis with a flat pan bottom. Very, very good on the track, short A-arms and really good shocks. This was the RC10 GT, the gas truck version. Its platform was still used up until a couple years ago in current racing, with very little changes because it was that good when it came out. These trucks, I know from racing them, you could literally run almost any setup in them and they would work. This is where you needed to practice your throttle control though, because two-wheel drive was a lot harder to drive than a four-wheel drive. You couldn't just come out of the corner on a good day and mash the throttle and hope it went straight. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at an 8 scale just to show you how big they were back then. Here we have the Thunder Tiger Silver Fox. This one was brand new out of the box and has never seen a drop of fuel. So this is literally how it came. Usually you'd have to install your motor, so you'd have to pick your favorite one and put it in. You'd have to paint up the driver, and you'd have to put in your radio system and get it all ready and build it from scratch. If you look at this one, it's got a pretty heavy driveline with a little roller chain that goes from front to back. It was very revolutionary because it changed the way the drive system was designed. The only problem with this is you get rocks and sticks in it all the time. So you'd have to be very careful where you're driving it. If you look at this car, there was really no expenses spared in the plastic molding here. It was fairly thick. They did that to try to make it tough because they didn't have the composites down back then for mixing glass with plastic. This was pretty much all plastic here. So it's a little bit flexible and it had to be fairly sturdy so it wouldn't break at the pivot arms here. With the suspension here in the back, they laid down the shocks to give it a little bit better of an attack angle, which worked fairly well for absorbing the bumps. If you notice the exhaust here in this motor, you can tell it's a little bit outdated. It wasn't advanced back then. And the cylinder porting, as well as the coating on the cylinders, wasn't what it is today. Nowadays, we usually have a chrome bore, and there's quite a bit of ports to them. Usually on a bigger motor, you'll see anywhere from about 6 all the way up to 12, 13, sometimes more. This is done to get your transfer and your timing, so you get your power and your mid-range and your bottom end. The tune pipe nowadays usually wraps around the side or however, and it'll have an expansion chamber as well as a header. This one's fairly basic. It came with a manifold, then went with a rubber to a big soup can, exhaust, and out the back. wasn't really any power band with that exhaust, because it would be the same all the way through. And being a two-stroke motor, you need a little bit of an expansion chamber and some deflection to make it get on the tune pipe. That just goes to show you what computer technology and lots of R&D has done for the hobby. It's advanced it quite a bit. This is only about 20 or 30 years old, so it's scary to see what another 20 or 30 years will do to the RC hobby. Who knows what'll come up? Electronic fuel injection? Bigger and badder brushless powered stuff? We don't know what's gonna happen. But you know what? I'm in for the long run, and I hope you are too. So we're gonna stick around and have to see what the hobby advances to. I'm Ryan from Eliminator RC. You enjoy some more RC TV.